Our first presenter this evening, Mike Leonard, has been with us, I think, since 2005. Is the head coach at Middlebury College. His topic will be developing a learner-first mentality as a coach, establishing metrics of success. Please help me welcome to the stage Coach Leonard.
Thanks so much, man. What's up, everybody? This is, without a doubt, the first time in my life that I've batted leadoff for anything. So I don't know how I got this distinction of being the opener for this incredible event. Maybe if you're here long enough, they're like, we've put you everywhere else in the lineup, usually at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Those of you that are here for the first time after your Friday night, if you're there 8 a.m. Saturday, I'll be impressed. But that's typically a lighter crowd. This is kind of like a really cool opportunity to kick things off and hopefully welcome all of you to this really great event that I've had a chance to be a part of for almost 20 years now, which sounds crazy because in my mind I'm still kind of that like young 20s, baseball player, not that 40-year-old coach, which I very much am. But I thought my topic would be super relevant to kick things off. I think that's part of what I talked with, Pete, Andy, and Rick about as we were putting this together. All of you are making the choice to be here tonight, right? So you're making a choice to be a part of this convention, and sure, there's a good amount of fun that will be had. You'll see friends like do that piece, which is super cool about the baseball community, but I think you're also here to take something away with you, right? We're in this unique spot as we're thinking about the preseason and getting ready for the spring. All right, how do I want to show up this spring? What happened last year, right? Reflecting on last year's season is usually a great way to go into this year. What do I need to do differently? Or for some folks in the room, maybe you're a brand new head coach, assistant coach, just starting this, and you're taking kind of like what I already know and then trying to expand that and add stuff to it. I also have become kind of like a little bit different of a coach than maybe when I started as a player, right? So, background was very much like baseball. I was a good athlete, played at UConn, played professional baseball, but I've coached at these Division III high academic schools, so it's kind of like flipped my identity a little bit, and now I stand into my role as coaching, and it's much more of being an educator, almost more professor-like. I'm teaching a class right now in addition to all my other baseball stuff. So this learning piece has become like a huge motivator for me. It's something I'm interested in. So in order to present on something, I wanted to do something that I was passionate about, that I thought was relevant, and also something that I'm super interested in. So as we think of kind of like this learning loop, right? So pretty straightforward, right? We've got some information that we take in. We're going to go apply that somewhere. The feedback piece is critical. How are we getting that feedback? And I'll kind of talk through kind of all that different area of feedback, right? And then there's that uniquely human aspect of reflecting on it, right? And this is happening cyclical, right? This is not just like a one and done. This is a lifelong process that hopefully all of us are engaged in many different areas, right? Kind of developing that growth mindset, that value for learning, for teaching, is something that we have the opportunity to do if we choose to do it, right? So thinking about coaching in baseball, no shortage of information that's out there, right? Especially the way that technology keeps evolving, the game keeps changing. We have access to information. But how are we utilizing it? What are we doing with new information that is coming to us? What are we choosing to learn more about? One of the interesting things about the way that we learn as adults, right? So there's probably a ton of teachers in the room, right? So we're educators. Educating young people is far more directive, right, than adult learning is. Adults, we want to choose what we're learning about. It's self-directed. I am in charge of my learning, right? You're not forced to go to class anymore. I don't have to kind of muddle through the subject area that I have no interest in, but it's in block 4 and I've got to go to it or else I get a detention and I'm not playing baseball after school, right? That's how most of us went through kind of our academic career. The older we get, we're self-directed in our learning, right? We're choosing content that is of interest to us, right? That we're able to put into practice with the things that we want to be doing. Mike's getting caught in my beard. So this whole idea of adult learning being self-directed, relevant, right? So baseball clearly an interest, right? That's an area that we are all here, we have a passion for, right? We have a role and responsibility as a coach. I want to do a better job with it. And how do I learn things, right? I've got to take that next step by actually practicing it, right? It's one of the best parts about coaching, right? I don't have to kind of type up a paper and write a report on my season and what I learned and what I put into play. I get to kind of put my players on the field and let them be my product, right? Let them be my presentation as to Did I become a better coach this year? Did the new, hitting routine that we put together improve our offense? Did my pitchers stay healthy this year as a result of our off-season throwing program, right? So I'm practicing and doing those things. This is a graphic that I got from the Cleveland Guardians. I thought it was just like a fantastic graphic that kind of like talked about how anyone in a professional space is going through their learning, right? And I'll talk through it just a little bit. So the top corner where it says self-guided, right? We do have that opportunity where I'm going to dive into a podcast, a friend recommends a book, I watch something on YouTube, right? I get like access to, maybe some online course, right? There's value in those things, right? I'm going to take that self-guided learning, I'm going to try something out and maybe go back and learn a little bit more about it, right? The other piece that I have is my training and education, right? I just went through and completed my doctorate of education and finished that in the fall of 2023. And one of the things that I looked at through that was how are coaches learning? What does our formal training look like, right? So all around the world, they have certifications and training programs and coaching specific levels that you move through, and there's actual formal training for coaches, right? What about all of us, right? We ended up kind of into a position, I liked it, maybe I was good at it as an athlete, maybe I started teaching and they needed someone to coach that sport, right? You end up in this position and you're thrown into it and you're doing it, right? And you're on the fly trying to become better at it. We don't always have this opportunity for training and education. Some of us do, right? There are opportunities to go to, undergraduate and take certain degree programs that are relevant to coaching and teaching and education. Certainly master's programs related to teaching, coaching, biomechanics and that stuff. So there's opportunities for formal education, but by and large, what we're learning is happening through experience on the job. So when we think about kind of like those developmental conversations, the last circle that's down there, right? That's where like our relationships with other coaches come into play, right? I'm going to venture to guess there will be some awesome coaching conversations at the Waterfall Bar like there is every single weekend at this event, right? You'll talk to somebody that you played, high school baseball with, someone you played college baseball with, like you'll have that conversation about coaching, right? And those are critical. Those also happen across departments, right? Maybe you're in a department at the college level where you've got a hallway and you've got the field hockey coach and the women's lacrosse coach and whoever on your hallway and you're having those conversations. Maybe some of you like have spouses, partners that are also coaches and you're kind of talking about coaching in your different spaces, but we have those other collegial relationships where we're having some of those conversations, right, with other coaches. But by and large, our learning, our coaching, our development is happening from doing it, right? We're showing up at practice, we're showing up to the batting cage, we're doing our bullpen work with our pitchers, we're running that practice, and that's how I'm learning what works and what doesn't work, right? And what I want to talk through a little bit today is how I learn that new information, how do I put it into practice, and then if I want to evaluate, am I doing this well, right? Is this working? Do I need this information? Do I need to adapt? How do I go through that? So all the teachers in the room who went through kind of any kind of an education program are probably really familiar with this. I don't know if I've ever looked at it and tried to apply it to baseball, which was super interesting to think about, right? So you're all sitting here right now, you can leave, you can remember some piece of information I gave you, there's an outline, right? You could take kind of that lowest level and maybe tell somebody else, what I talked about. Right? You might go a level deeper and I understand it. I conceptually get the concept of a learning loop. I understand that there's different levels of learning. I understand kind of what reflection looks like, right? So I conceptually understand. I could probably, explain it to someone else. As we move toward the top, let's think about some baseball specific things, right? If you were in charge of a hitting program for a professional team, right? You are the new hitting coordinator. Would you have the ability to create that hitting program, evaluate your hitters, right? Analyze swings, right? We know that takes a lot more experience, a much higher level of learning than just going and listening to a hitting talk, being able to kind of see what someone's doing, talk through it, bring the outline, bring the notes home. So if I'm trying to get in the middle here and apply this learning, right? There might be folks in the room hey, my goal is to keep moving up the ladder. I want to be a hitting coordinator, right? That's my goal. I want to run the offense at a college level, at the professional level, Maybe you have a really big travel team and someone's in charge of the hitting, for that. You might need to move up the ladder. For most of us, we're just trying to apply some of this new information that you're going to hear throughout the next 2 days into what you're doing, right? So what am I trying to apply? Why might I choose to go to certain programs and certain other ones? So that's what I want to work through kind of over the next part of this. Right, so coaching in today's landscape, this is a graphic straight from my dissertation defense, right? So as coaches, these are the factors that are converging upon college coaches right now, right? So the landscape of collegiate athletics. Some of us are pretty excited about watching like college football playoffs. I mean, it's on tonight. It's pretty awesome, but they're professional athletes making a whole lot of money, right? It is a very, very different world with NIL, with transfer portal, with the COVID eligibility, with if this, one lawsuit that happened at Vanderbilt becomes reality for everyone, where JUCO baseball or JUCO sports doesn't count towards your NCAA eligibility, holy cow, we're going to have just the day and age of paid older athletes playing college sports, consuming that, right, as a viewer, right, pretty entertaining. Coaching and working in that space, like you're seeing some of these longtime coaches have to step away to say, like, this is not the way that collegiate athletics was when I was there, right? It's way different, right? The expectations on coaches, right? I found this to be like just such a stressor on coaches. Whose expectations are you in charge of meeting with your role as a coach? Is it your own, right? I have my own metrics of success. This is how I view my role. This is what gives me purpose. These are my values. You have your players, and if you've got 30 of them, they might all have different expectations. You've got their parents, right? You've got alumni, right, if you're at the college level. Maybe the high school level too. You got a robust program, a lot of success. Alums are expecting you to stay at the level that when they were there, right? You have all these different factors of expectations, right? And then thinking about like the way that coaches are trained, education, those of us stepping into it, hundreds of thousands of people across the country are coaches doing this role. What is our training? What does our like standardization look like for a baseball coach at the high school level, for a baseball coach at the college level, for a professional baseball coach, right? There's not necessarily a standardization for that. So there's so much nuance and freedom, which is cool. There's a lot of ways to be a coach, but it's also really confusing to try to compare program to program and for player to player, right? And then certainly the needs of students changing, right? So what students are expecting from a coach, right, and how that changed. And I refuse to kind of get into this like grumpy old man on the porch thing, be like kids these days, right? Kids are a product of the environment they grow up in, right? So some of us in the room, we're parents, right? We might be parents and coaches. And those people that we're coaching, right, the reason that they are how they are, a lot of it has to do with the way that they're parented, right? A lot of it has to do with the world that they're growing up in. They've got access to information, right? So that immediacy of information, that communication, compassion, social emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it, that babying, if we want to go down that rabbit hole. Kids are too soft these days. You can't hold them accountable, right? So we have those factors, and then we have this giant animal of youth sports, right? We have organized soccer for 4-year-olds where they're directed and told how to do everything. So then they get to the high school and college level, and there's any kind of freedom, any kind of decision they need to make on their own, they don't know how to do it. Why don't they know how to do it, right? Because they've had someone telling them how to do it and explaining it to them every step of the way. So interesting to think about like who we're coaching and what does coaching look like? How is that different? So in terms of skills, like what are some of the things that like folks are coming here to learn? I always try to dive into one of these areas because I don't think they ever get taught and talked about. But I think if you were to reflect on the success of a team, right, at any level, right, if I want to invest, if I want return on my investment, if I want to have a better program, whatever your definition of success is, do I get more return by spending time learning about hitting and swing patterns and fielding positions and pitching mechanics? Or might I be better served if I had better training in communication? I was able to communicate to a diverse group of students. They were able to hear me as I was intended to be heard. I was able to communicate the message clearly. What if I was better at organizing, right? I had a better system of keeping track of information. How about building team culture? This is what I did my whole dissertation on, right? Where do coaches learn the skills to build cultures of belonging? I want all my players to feel connected, supported, be a part of this team. Where do we learn how to do that as coaches? We kind of just show up and hope it goes right? You kind of have a certain sense of like how you communicate with people. There's like this constant interaction we have. There's not always a space for training, development, and learning. Why? Because it's not super like sexy and fun. I don't have any cool videos up here of someone like throwing and hitting a baseball, right? But those, in my opinion, are the critical factors. And when you talk with coaches, right, coaches who have success, and ask them, what are the keys to your success? A lot of their traits and qualities fall into these interpersonal skills, right? Can I build relationships, right? Can I build relationships with my athletes? Can I help them build relationships with one another? Am I able to communicate effectively, right? Am I able to execute a plan? What is my plan for strength and conditioning, for off-season throwing, right? And how do I get better at doing that? And I think as coaches, we don't spend enough time learning in that space and reflecting on that. We'll immediately go to, my team was bad this year. We didn't win any games, right? Our offense didn't score runs. I got to do a better job with our hitters, right? That tends to be where we will go to first. But here's the deal with trying to like develop hitters. If we were to kind of develop an exhaustive list, you know how many variables there are to offense, to hitting, to each individual hitter? And how much time do all of you have with your athletes, right? Probably as much time as I do, or maybe even not as much as I do, but it's not enough to completely overhaul offense, right? I had a conversation with a person who's a mentor of mine. Bob Tewksbury is a longtime Major League Baseball player, sports psychologist for the Red Sox, Cubs, Giants. And I was lamenting on how bad our team was doing. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I just cannot get the most out of this group. Like, we had talent at the beginning of the year. We're not playing well. He goes, why do you think you have that much influence over their performance on the field? You work at an academic school, so you don't get to choose your athletes, right? Admissions chooses them for you. You only get to coach them for 3 months a year. You can't even coach them in the fall. Baseball's not their top priority, because if it was, they wouldn't be at a school like that. Right? Oh, and you're in Maine. The weather's not very good in Maine, right? So stop thinking that you have that much control over their performance, right? And at some level that was comforting, but then on the other side of things, like, well, someone else is winning with the same restraints, so like, I want to be better. I don't want to have a season like this. But it was a really good reality check in terms of like, what are the things under my control? Right? And some of the issues, I think, with that team as I reflect back on it had nothing to do with how we operated our baseball scenario, had everything to do with leadership, team dynamics, communication, messaging, and some of that piece. So as we think about, like, you know, again with these skills, like, think to yourself, like, what are the things, if you were to kind of create your matrix, what do you do well currently? How do you know you do it well? Right? We're really good at, you know, we give our players a hard time. They're terrible at self-evaluating. How come he can't tell that he's got no bat speed and no power and he's trying to lift everything? Do you know if you're a terrible communicator? Right? Has anyone ever had that real honest conversation with you? Have you ever reflected on a time where you communicated really effectively or a time you felt like your message didn't land? Right? So some of this self-awareness piece is super hard. Right? And as like athletes, right? All of us as coaches, let's call ourselves athletes, even if we're former athletes, we tend to do the things that we're good at, right? We stay in those spaces. Like as athletes, it comes down to like, I like to hit, so I'm gonna go spend more time in the batting cage, right? Maybe the answer isn't on more swings, maybe the answer is on more sleep, right? If I really like to lift weights, I'm gonna go put more weight on and try to throw heavy weight around. Maybe the answer to being better is actually lifting less, recovering more, moving better. So I think as professionals, when we get into those interpersonal spaces, we tend to lean into the things we do well. And there are some folks in this room who are excellent planners. Like they're driven by data, they love numbers, they love kind of that approach to planning things. Where they struggle with is then taking that and communicating it to a broad audience, right? There are folks that hate public speaking, right? They hate having to talk in front of a group. How often are you practicing that skill and growing and developing in it? And is that something that might help in your coaching? I couldn't resist on the next graphic here to kind of show off like our field. It was about baseball, so I was like, oh, I'll throw up a picture of our cool brand new field. It was among the most exciting things like I ever got to do as a coach, was kind of like design a field from ground up. But the game is changing, right? So now let's pivot a little bit, right? Talked about kind of the importance of interpersonal skills and where those can be learned and should I learn them. Let's think about the game, right? Any one of these topics, if you wanted to right now, you could go online and kind of start a fight between this group and this Instagram person and this Facebook person and this Twitter person about, hitting. This is the right way to hit. This guy's an idiot. This is the right way to pitch. Everyone should be throwing, black plyos as fast as they can into a wall. That's how you build arm strength, right? You could have so much fun kind of like teasing with this online group. But here's the deal, like the game does change, right? There's no doubt about it. You can look at the game that's on TV, the game that we're watching, it's completely different, right, than it was even 10 years ago, right? Athletes are different, technology is different, all of that stuff is changing. So we are left with a choice as coaches. We can adapt, right? We can reflect on what we're doing. Do I need to make changes? Is it working, right? And again, we'll go, into the future talking about kind of how I'm measuring success. Is it working for me? And if the answer is yes, right? I don't care whatever expert is here talking about swing stuff, you don't need to change your hitting approach, right? If your metrics of success are being checked, just because like there's some new guru who's got a new drill out there doesn't mean it needs to change, right? But the benefit to that learning, you get that choice of application and you get that choice of trying to decide, do I need to put it into practice? Does it need to change? So I was a former catcher, which is why I made the joke about batting leadoff, because I'd never batted leadoff as a catcher. So the idea with like catching stances, right? I think this is like another one of those things that we see. You'll see every single catcher just about everywhere on one knee now, right? And I think it almost happened overnight. It was kind of like a weird phenomenon that like it was happening kind of at the pro level, and then every showcase high school travel event that I went to, every kid was on a knee. Makes sense. We all kind of model after what we see on TV with the big leaguers. So let's think about it. And this is what I go through like as a catching coach. Like how should I be coaching my players, right? And what I have to do constantly is I have to do what they're doing, right? I've got to see how it works, right? So what are some of the benefits to being on one knee? Well, you are certainly more stable, right? It's a lot more comfortable to be down there on one knee than it is to be in that old school traditional stance, right? Your knees, my 40-year-old knees, your knees at whatever age they are, well, thank you for being kind of on one knee versus two. All right, so there's some benefit to that. In terms of like targeting, position, striking the ball, catching the ball, what does that look like? Doesn't hurt your positioning, right? Frees up your hand in certain places, maybe gives a better view for umpires, right? All right, I'm seeing some benefits to the receiving aspect of it. One of the things that I found often when I was working with catchers, trying to get them into a traditional stance, right? You have mobility deficiencies. Some athletes just are not going to get their butt low to the ground when you get them in a catching stance. It just isn't going to happen. Right? We don't have the time to improve that mobility. So this is in some ways a hack to that, right? Put them on a knee. Now we don't have to worry about their mobility, right? They're able to get into good stances. So there's some benefits to it. What do we lose from that position, right? So this was something that we worked hard with, our group this fall on talking about. Because I think some of them feel pressured that they have to be on a knee because that's what everyone else is doing. And I talked with all of our catchers and said, how do you feel blocking a baseball on one knee? Well, I feel like this pitch I can block pretty well. It's like, I agree. What about this one? I don't think I can block that very well. I'm like, I agree with you. I just watched that pitch go to the backstop 3 times. So what can we do about this? Well, coach, can I be in a traditional stance with a runner on third base? Like, yes, you can, right? So this kind of like analysis of the position, rather than just taking it at face value and saying all catchers are on a knee, right? Therefore they have to be. Is there some variation of a hybrid to it? Right? And you might have a catcher who's on a knee who blocks everything. He can maintain mobility, right? He's able to do it. The other piece that we constantly have to do, which is often really hard with high school and college players, is we will mirror the major leagues. We all know the game is very, very different at the high school and college level than it is on TV, right? Misses are bigger, right? Pitchers are less consistent. Catchers react slower. There's everything about the game is different, right? Regardless of what level you're at, a run is still the most valuable thing in baseball, right? So if catching, we can increase our ability to prevent runs, I want to be able to do that. So there's just like one example in terms of like what you might see, what you might be asked to do. And I think that process of like, what did I just learn? That made sense. How do I then analyze and put that into practice for the level at which I'm coaching? So let's think about this whole process of like implementing it. And I'm going to use a kind of a story a little bit to illustrate this. So one of the hardest things for me as a coach at our level is I look down at our bullpen and I'm like, I have no idea who to put in the game right now, right? Because it's like 10 pitchers who are all good enough to be on our team, who have all shown success at different times in different situations, but they're inconsistent enough that it's not easy for me to be like, yep, we're going to him, right? He's the guy that's going to the game. So you're trying to balance all of these factors as a coach in real time, right? And that's one of the things, again, if I go back to some of those soft skills, decision making. How am I as a coach at decision making, right? Real time, in the moment decision making, right? Whether it's pinch hit, situational hitting, or a bullpen change, right? And we do get the luxury of planning and thinking about it ahead of time. So one of the things that I struggled with was like who to put into games, when to put them into games. And it was often the same conversation with my assistants. These guys are so inconsistent. Like, I don't know who to put in. They make this so hard on us, right? So I was directing my frustration at them. And then I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk to a coach about this, right? I'm going to talk to somebody who's not related to our team. And they said, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And I said, I want to feel better about who I put into games. I want to have more confidence. I want to have a plan. All right. What are the criteria for putting someone into a game? What's the situation? Is it different with a lead? Is it different in the third inning? Is it different in the seventh inning, right? And some of you are hearing this and being like, no crap. Like, this is an easy thought process. I'm telling you right now, I've coached a long time. I've been around baseball a lot. Working through this really like dumb rudimentary process was like the best thing I ever did with helping with my bullpen decision making, right? So I was going through this checklist. And what ended up happening is coming through that, right, is I realized I had a couple pitchers we were going to pretty consistently who were very consistently not good when we brought them in a clean inning, which is crazy, right? They had shown success getting out of jams. They were the people that could kind of put out the fire, right? We pitched them in big spots. They had success, which flipped my kind of like impression of them to thinking that they were the go-to player in the eighth inning in a one-run game, clean inning. You know what they were doing every single time? Walking or hitting the leadoff guy. And what was different, right, was their mindset. Runners on base, adrenaline, fired up, go out there, get it done, clean inning, not real good at it. So that was a pretty big aha moment with those players, right? Some of them could do better going back out after cleaning up an inning. Some of them we had to kind of like cut down and, hey, you're just going to come into games, get your outs, and then you're done, and we'll use you again tomorrow. The other thing we learned from that, right, was some of our players had pitches that we would put them in bad spots with. So if it's a righty, we would use him pretty effectively against righties with like a fastball and a slider, and then he'd throw a really good changeup at times to lefties. So he looked like a balanced pitcher. We could have him face both guys. But what we ended up realizing was that most of the time, that pitch that like at times was a swing and miss for a really good strikeout was also like the 55-footer that went to the backstop. So that player could never come in with runners on base because they were almost a guarantee for a wild pitch if they had to throw one of those pitches in a strikeout situation. So we stopped using them in those situations. Fast forward towards the end of the year, it was probably the most success that like I had ever had as a coach with making bullpen decisions. Every single game had a plan. Every single like pitcher on our team knew what role they were good at. They developed more confidence through it. And it was this whole process of actually thinking about like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve, right? And at the end of the day, I might put someone into a game and they still might do poorly. But I wanted to feel like I was making an informed decision, right, on that. Because at the end of the day as a coach, like you don't ever throw a pitch, you don't ever take a swing, you do make those decisions, right? So having that process to be able to do that. The other piece to this, as we think about measuring success, right, pretty common language around kind of like outcome, process versus outcomes. As coaches, right, we are in sports for a reason. So we are going to look at scoreboards, right? There's no way to get around that. Have the end of a game, there is a winner, there is a loser, right? You know what your stats are. You know how your hitters performed. You know how your pitchers performed. If I'm trying to improve performance, or if I'm trying to change one of those outcome metrics, right, I have to figure out what are the behaviors, what are the processes that are getting us towards that, right? And do I have a realistic timeline of that? So one of the things we've started to do more is frame what the goal is for our players when we give them certain days, right? So our off-season, program, everybody wants to, move weight around in the weight room, want to, get better at hitting. So we had to frame what does hitting look like for each player, right? Is success for you contact, right? So if we're doing X amount of drills, what do I evaluate at the end of my round, right? I evaluate how many line drives I had. Because what hitters will end up doing if they have access to any kind of like a hit tracks or a radar gun to see how hard they're hitting it, they'll immediately start kind of like, oh, I hit that one good. Can I hit that one better? And then if they see the number go down, they've shifted their focus, right? So we have a range of players on our team. Some of them hit the ball really hard, some of them don't. And if we're on a contact day, the player who doesn't hit the ball as hard as the other player is sitting there in that cage chasing exit velocity, trying to chase hitting the ball harder. So if we frame for them success for you is line drives, it's different. The flip side of that is like we want players at times, if they're going to chase bat speed on a day, right? This is your day. This is your hour in the cage. You're chasing bat speed. You know what that might come with? Some swing and miss, right? So be okay with those swing and misses instead of just reacting to every single swing. So kind of establishing what those process and outcome metrics are for each athlete. Right, so one of the key pieces to coaching that I've found kind of like really interested in, if you just say like, what does success look like, right? I think people are going to start with, well, it's winning and losing, right? But we all know that we don't play the game. Some of us get to kind of choose our players. Some of us don't. We talked about already how much time you get to spend with them. So what else can success be, right? And how am I actually going about trying to develop those success metrics, and how are they possibly supporting the outcome metric of winning, right? So this idea of player satisfaction, feedback, how are you observing your players, right? What does it look like when they show up and you're not interacting with them, right? Do you see joy? Are they enjoying being there? Are they enjoying certain parts of it? Do they enjoy kind of like the 10 minutes before you start talking and they're all kind of having fun and joking around, and then you start talking and all of a sudden they look terrified? So what are you observing from them? How much time are you spending talking with them? And this is like an interesting takeaway again from the research I did through my dissertation, was like these check-ins, these one-on-one check-ins that coaches have with players, right? It can be a formal sit-down in a meeting. It can be as simple as BP's going on, an assistant coach is throwing, and you're walking around and checking in with each player, right? And what am I learning from each one of those interactions, right? What is that feedback telling me about where they are, their enjoyment of the team, and what they need right now, right? So this is real-time feedback in how you're coaching and how you're coaching each player, right? Other outcome metrics that are on here: graduation rate, alumni engagement, fundraising, other. One metric that I've put on for our program, I have like my 5th set of siblings in our program, right? So I'm doing something right if mom and dad are like, you know what, I'd let your younger brother play there too, right? And it's been a really cool kind of like metric of success that I never would have thought of. And all of these things, like going into one another, are supporting kind of that direct result of being a better on the field program. But it's tough to start at the end and say, I want to win more games. I want to have a winning team, because so many of these other factors that support winning are out of our control. So if we double down on other metrics of success, can I have a successful game and lose, right? All of us have been a part of that, right? Your team competed, did a great job, threw strikes, got timely hitting, just, lost by a run late in the game, right? Just baseball. We've had years where we didn't win games, right? And it felt like this was a pretty good season. Like, players got better. We were young. We didn't win as much as we were supposed to. People got better. They had fun. We're looking bright for the future. I'll talk about teams that I had. Of the last 3 years, we've been in the NCAA tournament 3 years in a row. Last year's team and the team before, so 2023, arguably the most talented team I have ever had. And I think if you asked every single player on the team, was this year a success, they would have said no, right? There was this tremendous pressure on that group all year because they were pretty good the year before. They had the same team, never really gelled and connected, right? It just didn't end up working. And a quote from, one of my current captain, who was a sophomore on that team, he said, "Coach, we were talented, but we just weren't really good at playing baseball." And I was like, "Well, tell me what that means. What does it mean we weren't good at playing baseball?" He's like, "All those like little baseball things that you're supposed to do, right? Like fielding the routine ball, like running hard down the line, like competing with 2 strikes. We didn't do any of those things consistently, right?" So it was really like incredible feedback for me on performance metric, NCAA tournament, like that's a success, right? Especially at a school where we hadn't done that 2 times in a row ever. And then also to listen for my players' feedback, all right? So to really hear that from him, like it wasn't fun. We didn't enjoy it. There wasn't like that connection, right? So what did I do the next year? I took that feedback and then I thought about like, what do they need? And honestly, as crazy as it sounds, we needed more structure, more discipline, more kind of like standardization of things for them. That's what they were craving because we kind of like swung the pendulum too far the other direction, right? We had success, it's working, just trust the guys to go do what they're going to do. I actually had to adapt my coaching, and it was the most I've ever had to kind of be on top of every single little thing, from every throw they made during catch play to every single time they ran down the bases. And this is with an older team. We had 13 seniors last year, right? And some of them were fifth-year seniors, right? So that's typically the way that you would coach a younger team. But some of that, evaluation for me came through talking with my players and looking there. I've only got a couple minutes left, but I want to kind of leave with this last piece right here. As you're thinking about, reflecting on your coaching, right? The quote, "It's lonely at the top." I find this to be one of the most interesting phenomena, in our profession, right, as coaches. We are very eager to coach other people, right? We are valuable to them, right? They need us, right? They come to us for everything to help me be a better pitcher, help me field the ball. "Coach, I just, had this situation at home, help me work through this. Coach, I don't know what to do next year, for college. Can you help me, think about that process?" Our players come to us for everything. We are extremely valuable to them. There is constant pressure coming up to us, right? Where is that space for us to be coached as coaches? Who coaches us, right? Who's giving us that feedback around, the way that you're communicating, your practice plans, your hitting philosophy? Are you actually doing the job the way that you're equipped to do it, or the way that you want to be doing that, right? And who do you get to have those conversations with when you're like, "I don't know what the heck to do in this situation"? Oftentimes it's really hard as coaches. We have this kind of pride in that, I am the leader, I am the head coach. If I show this vulnerability and say I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not doing this well, right? Somehow that takes away from our role as coaches. But what that actually does is it kind of opens up more opportunity for growth, right? We know from studies that vulnerability invites connection from others, right? So as a coach, sometimes that space of saying, "You know what, I messed this up. I didn't do a good job with this," or showing that process of "You know what, there's things I got to get better at too," right? Actually strengthens that connection with your team, right? So what does that space look like? So a couple takeaways, right? If you're leaving this being all right, I just listened to some guy talk about coach learning, I get it. Nothing he said was revolutionary. I know all of this stuff conceptually. How many of you are actually practicing these things? Consistent space for those thoughts, those reflections on coaching, right? Everyone in here's probably got some type of a notepad. You're going to take stuff away from you from this conference. Probably do what I did for all my years. I've still got kind of pads of paper in some, filing cabinet somewhere from some talk I heard in 2014 that was really interesting, right? Do I have a place to curate that information, right, and able to put a plan together with it, right? Is it useful to me? Is there a way for me to go back to think about that? What does that process look for you? And journaling could be like a ton of different things. Our players do this, and I give them the freedom to do it any number of ways. I give them a binder, right, where they can write on a piece of paper, right? There's something about that direct action of writing something that connects differently to our brain than typing it on a phone, right? Some of them do like to type on their phone. They use the notes section, they use a voice memo. Totally cool to do that too. Journaling and reflection can also look like picking up the phone, calling that person who's your mentor, your assistant coach, your former assistant coach, whoever it might be, that reflection. Post-game practice and post-practice and post-game breakdown, right? So this idea of we just had a practice using this framework. What was the goal or intended purpose of this practice, right? I write our learning objectives on each practice, right? This is what I'm hoping my players are going to get out of practice today. What actually happened? Then I have to evaluate the practice, right? So today we're focusing on defensive execution. We want to be able to make the routine play. So we're going to field as many routine plays as we can, right? What did that look like? We threw the ball all over the place, right? So we didn't execute defensively on the throwing side of things, all right? What would I do better next time, right? So I might break that down more and say defensive execution looks like making the routine throw, right? Instead of framing it in a way that was like complex, I might simplify it for my players. Just trying to use an example, but that whole framework of what was the goal, what did I want to happen, what happened, what can I do better next time, right? And I use this all the time with myself and with my players. Lastly, feedback and coaching. I've mentioned this already. The idea of like, what kind of feedback do you get from your players, right? They are going to give you feedback that is sometimes useful, sometimes it's not useful. Like, let's be honest. Like, the player who's really happy and got a good role is going to tell you, you're doing great. Coach, I love you. This is awesome. The player who's not happy with where things are at, their mom's going to send an email, or their dad's going to send an email to your AD and say that you suck as a coach, right? So, like, there's some nuance to this, right? So that idea with player feedback, there's always going to be a power dynamic. You can't just kind of ask a kid directly, hey, how am I doing as a coach? Do you think I'm doing a good job? Right? There's a way to kind of have these conversations. And there's also that direct and observable feedback you get from your players, right? What does it look like when they show up to practice? Have another coach come watch your practice, right? I think this is something we do very little of, but we should do more of, right? My assistant and I joke, like, our dream job is to take over like a mid-major Division I basketball team and just see what we can do with it and see if we can make a run and be like a 12 seed in the NCAA tournament, right? But it's this idea of like, what kind of creativity, what kind of fun would you have with a sport that you're not familiar with? So as a coach, if someone not familiar with your sport watches you coach, what might they see from you? Might they suggest a drill that you've never thought of doing that might be super cool for you to do? Right? Might they see something in the way that you communicate that's either really helpful, hey, you do a great job of this, keep doing that, or just want you to know that every time you talk to the team, you bury your head like this and they can't even hear what you're saying. And then lastly, if you have an opportunity, you know, and if there are resources for it, like finding a personal coach, mentor, I cannot speak highly enough about the value in having like that presence of someone to kind of like work through things on. You know, we respect the position of coaching. All of you are in it, right? It's something you take pride in as being a coach. We don't always do a good enough job of kind of soliciting that coaching for ourselves. And it's not readily available, right? I think if you're a C-suite executive, you've got a nice budget to have your private coach. If you are the varsity baseball coach at public school, whatever, there's probably not a big stipend for you to pay, you know, thousands of dollars a month for your private coach. But whoever that person looks like, there's tremendous value in it. So I think I'm at time right now. I'm happy to stick around for questions, but so grateful that all of you are here, and have a great rest of the convention.